Hey community, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, I'm Dr. Blaire, a doc in clinical psychology, and on this channel we discuss psychology, inspiration, social justice, and all topics in between. First things first, hit that subscribe and bell button. You know I want to see you back next week, and of course, stay tuned because we're going to jump into and continue this conversation around they cloned Tyrone. Keep watching. All right, so heads up, I'm going to have to break this conversation up into multiple parts. So this is part whatever is there in the description box, but we recorded it all in one setting. So it's up to you to make sure that you watch it in order. With that being said, keep watching. If we program you to see her as nothing more than a hoe, as nothing more than a collector of monies, then she cannot be of value to you. Therefore, you won't see her as a person who can be helpful. But that is exactly what she was designed to do for you.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
What even reiterates that is the moment where they had just went to the little laboratory thing up under the church, the big one. And after they were seeing everything that they were doing, the mind control and all of those things, and they went in the bathroom and they're like, what we done got ourselves into, y'all? Like, we gotta get up out of here. They gonna kill us. But Yo-Yo, if you listen, between the three of them were saying, her main thing was like, we gotta tell people. We gotta let them know. We gotta go. We gotta alert the people. We gotta get out of here so we can. And meanwhile, the other two are just like, we just gotta get out of here. And Fontaine is like, no, I came here because he had already seen himself at the previous spot, so he already know what he's trying to look for. Slick Charles is like, I gotta get up out of here because they're gonna kill me. This is crazy. I don't want to be a part of this. But Yo-Yo, her main focus even then was, we gotta let people know. We gotta alert people. We gotta tell somebody. This ain't right. And so I think that, again, speaks to the whole narrative of not just Hope, but the role, again, as Help Me in our community, or just women in general, what our role is as women, and still holding on to that purpose.
Alicia, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I thought about, you brought up a point of taking away that sense of hope, that sense of Help Me from the male perspective in the Black community. Think about the relationship with his mom. Yes. She's not really there.
I was gonna bring that back up.
So you already see Fontaine is kind of alone, and he has to rely on the people within his community to kind of keep him up. And it's not always the best. You got a little kid. What the little kid gonna do for him? Nothing but bring back his youth, right? Then you got, the hoes and the pimps. And what are they gonna do? Keep him happy for, a few minutes, bringing the money in and whatever they doing on the side, you know what I'm saying? But then he goes home and his mom is not present, even though she's present. So that was another way that you took away that Helped Me from him, that he had to seek out, solace from somewhere else. And that, you brought it back to him being, drug dealer, a dope boy. So now he's like, that's all I know, because I don't have anything else. But Yo-Yo keeps coming back. She keeps coming. And the other one, her name was Biddy.
Biddy.
Yeah, her name was Biddy. So he saw value in them, even though he didn't realize how valuable they were at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's such a good point. Oh my goodness, this conversation is rich, y'all. Now we could be here forever on that one, but I want to transition to this other part. And we kind of already talked about, the younger versus the old, but let's kind of come back to that because we talked about it from Junebug, but we did not talk about it for Fontaine. Now, let me just pause and kind of set the tone so that people understand how many different Fontaines there actually are. So there is y'all help me out. We got one Fontaine who is a clone who has been quote unquote resurrected as this drug dealer. That is the type one. That's the main character that we often see. This is the one that was also in The Color Green. Then we found out when we found out that most of the community is programmed. When they left a club and they were being chased, we recognized that all of them were under control by the music. We're gonna get to that in a minute. Then we found out that there's another Fontaine who was actually programmed to work for the experimenters.
Mm-hmm.
And later in the movie, at the very end, we find out about an original Fontaine who contributed to this entire experiment and movement. So I'm going to kick it off with talking about the original Fontaine and my conceptualization of what I actually think spearheaded this entire thing. At the end, the I shouldn't say old Fontaine. The older, also original Fontaine talks about the reason that he started this experiment and how he contributed to it and why, right? Well, what I gather is the reason comes from he actually did have a brother that he lost. His brother's name was Ronald. And we see that in the obituary that's on the refrigerator. Multiple times we get multiple shots of that. And also in the car, he had a picture. And he's telling the clone Fontaine that I only allow for you to have memory of part of it because the rest of it was too painful. Woof. So when we know about trauma, well, we talked about trauma here on this channel before, is trauma. Sometimes some memories, some experiences are so painful that we will end up blocking things out, or we will end up disassociating from it, having to create some level of distance from the painful memory. And so I believe that all of this got started, all of this hurting other people started from the sheer fact that this man was hurt and he was living in a place where he was unhealed for years. All right, what does this have to do with us? Because it has to do with the three of us here. It has to do with all of you who are watching and everybody else who's going to watch in the future. Amen. All right. If we are unhealed, it skews, it warps our perspective, our experience of life, our experience with other people. It warps our interactions with others. It even warps our perspective of ourselves. And so you have a man who was so deeply hurt by the loss of his brother, who I believe was also a loss of his youth, a loss of his innocence, right? That was the part of, okay, this is where my journey of being that black boy joy that we talked about earlier, it stops here. Yep. And so he has spearheaded all of this pain that is being replicated across the entire nation or globe. Because you hurt, which valid to be hurt, but mainly because you weren't healed. I'm gonna pause there. Let y'all jump in.
Did we ever find out what age he was when his brother was killed?
No, I don't remember him saying.
He must have been at least a couple years apart, I would think.
Yeah, he was older than his brother.
He was older. Okay.
Or at least that's what the sense I got, that he was an older brother. But he did see his brother go through a level of suffering and so I wonder, this is questions that I have. Did he feel like he couldn't protect his brother? Or, did he see part of himself in his brother that was also killed by this police officer? Was that the beginning of his loss of hope that started there? And Yo-Yo coming along was a restoration of that hope?
I think the loss of it, as well as the lack of compassion to his brother, because he talked about how his brother was not shot fatally. Like, the shot was not fatal at the beginning, but they literally left him there to bleed out for 15 minutes. And so I think, like, going back to like what you said about the pain part and how that unhealed part of him also made him want to, like, it warps also your reality of things. And so how it gets him to a place of like, my brother was killed because he was a black boy by white cops, and because of this, my solution to that is that all black people, let's just be white, and then there is no color differentiation. There is no line anymore, because they won't do this to their own people. So like your pain went so deep, and the crazy part, or not, I don't want to say crazy part, but the crazy part about it is that not only did he want to do this for himself, like, he felt like he was actually helping his community by doing this. He was like, I'm doing y'all a favor so y'all won't have to experience the pain that I felt. But again, that warpedness of your perception and of your judgment and all of those things come into play because you weren't healed by a hurt. Yes, it was wrong, but then you went ahead and added all of these other steps onto it that just was not logical on any playing
field. Yeah, that part was wild.
My thing is, okay, so if you want to, mask your pain in some way, shape, or form, okay, fine. But why go so deep as to clone folks so that they don't, feel it, and they kind of relive whatever life they were having before. But now you've put them in multiple different areas in the world, and they have different lives. But then what happens, like we see at the end, when they all start to see themselves, like when Tyrone starts to see a naked clone on the news. Now you got Tyrone over here who's like, wait a minute, I'm living my life over here. I don't know what is going on over there. Fontaine was already confused, but now you see Chester, who is, the one that's being super mind controlled. Even Chester notices, I don't know if you all picked this up, but when they were all the folks from the club, when they all were surrounded by them in the car, and the experiment guy, or the guy that cleans up, the issues, controlled all of them by saying, I forget what he said.
Olympia Black.
Yeah, Olympia Black or something like that. But Chester, his eyes are moving around like, damn, me too. He starts to see a little bit of it, and then you see it again when all the Fontaines are in the room, when the older Fontaine, the current clone Fontaine, and Chester, and they are all looking at each other like, damn, this is a portion of me that I don't know, but then I know, but then I don't know. But then we make it so big that now it looks like you've lost control. And now you got,
Yeah, see that, and this is, all of this is a control and manipulation of a people. This is the injustice that comes to it. But of course, the point was never for the next community to find out that there's replications of their same community somewhere else. So when they get to the LA version and they're starting to see this on the news, obviously none of this was supposed to be exposed in that southern state, right? And because it was exposed, now that awareness has starting to spread. It's contagious, that wokeness, or now we see that there's something more to this. So people start asking questions, because what we saw with Fontaine and also with Slick Charles is, even when they tried to live in silence with knowing what they knew after that one scene of being chased out of the club, they were miserable. They didn't know, they couldn't live life the same way now that they had this level of awareness. And so I don't believe that the experimenters ever expected that things would get out of control. They always expected to have a level of control. In fact, the one guy who came to clean up stuff, he explained that this is what we do. Here's the setup. We do all these things and we replicate all of these things, so nobody comes to these communities, so nobody wants to come and see what's going on, so nobody has eyes on what's going on. This is how we get full control, to be able to do what we want to do without anyone coming in and governing us. And so they were able to replicate that in various different areas. This is why I hope we get a part 2, because there's room and opportunity for more, because I think that that's like the second part of the revolt of all these other areas starting to find out that they have been replicated, or their roles have been replicated, because that's really the cloning, is that not where we're cloning a person, but we're cloning a role, we're cloning a type, we're cloning a track for you to go on life over and over. And this is why I love that generalization that we saw, because it's applicable to almost every city, almost every neighborhood. It is applicable, and it's pretty much that we're not going to put a name that's recognizable. We're not going to put this in a Chicago, like where we're from. We're not going to put this in a Nashville or whatever, or a Memphis, because they said that they were going to go to Memphis, but it wasn't based out of that. We're just going to make this look like a southern state, and we're going to put no name to it, because actually you southern states and, over in the East Coast, up in Midwest, and even out on the West Coast, we all can resonate and understand what's going on here in that city. And so it brings me to elements of the generalization that we saw, not just in location and not just in personality types or even the traits, because I'm sure we all saw somebody we could think in our lives like, yeah, this reminds me of so-and-so who I've came across, or even maybe you resonated with some of the characters that you saw in the movie. But that's because that's how real it is that we do see this on a regular basis. And these are people that we know. They just have different names in this movie. Simple as that. Well, I shouldn't say simple as that, but as simple as that.
One thing that kind of makes my mind wonder, as we talk about like wanting a part 2 to this, is like just the mindset of now these clones, like what do they do with them now that they're out in the open, like because technically they haven't been programmed yet. Like if you notice how when they would get a new clone, they would set them in front of the screen to, I guess, give them the memories or whatever for the person that they are. But these clones didn't get that. So it's almost like they look like whoever, like, Fontaine's clone at the end of the movie that Tyrone saw. He looks like him, but he's not acting like Tyrone or Fontaine because he doesn't have anything. So it's like, what do they do? It reminds me a little bit of the movie Us, and how they had like the tethered people, and then the tethered people got tired of being just left underground, and they came up, to get their revenge or whatever. But it's almost like they have these people, and then I'm wondering, like, I guess in a part 2 of like, what are they gonna do with these clones, or to even find out, like Fontaine was kind of going through that thought process throughout the movie of figuring out that I'm a clone, I'm not real, like I'm me. He said that a lot when he would see another version of himself, like, no, I'm me, you're not me. And to finally see the original Fontaine, and he's faced with that reality that he's not him, and that I've been programmed to be something. It's like, again, what does he do with that? Like, where do you go? Do you just continue to be the person you've been programmed to be? Like, I feel like that alone would kind of send a person. Do we call these people? I don't know. These people, I don't know. Who need like a extra
laboratory folks.
Yeah.
No, I feel like that, like that's even very prophetic, which we kind of talked about a little bit before we actually started recording, that there are a lot of elements that are in this movie that are actually going on in real life. Some of it is figuratively, but some of it is literally, right? So we're seeing more articles come out about, and I don't even know the proper term, so forgive me if I don't say politically correct, but what I call to be lab babies that are grown in a artificial womb sac. If that's the appropriate term, but I think that you all understand what I mean. There have been some things that have come up for me prophetically that have essentially showed me that there are things like that are happening that the general public don't know is actually happening in an abundance. Everybody's up in arms about, this lab chicken that they feel like that's being sold at Walmart, right? But it's also happening with another generation. It's a little hard to say.
To the broccoli for years. She knows how I feel. Dr. Blaire knows how I feel about the whole broccoli thing, because that really just tore me up inside. I love me some broccoli. And one day I think I was making it, and she said, I was on the phone with Dr. Blaire, she said, that's not real. And I'm like, what you mean? I went to Google it, I'm like, oh my God.
Fresh a little heart.
I'm not ruin a lot of food things for you that aren't real.
I mean, but no, I went down a whole rabbit hole. So at this point, I'm like, I'm just thank the Lord and just eat what I'm eating, because it's a lot. Like, especially fruits and vegetables, like it's been done with those things so much that they don't even call them like lab or GMO anymore. They just say, oh, it's just naturally alternated or whatever. And I'm like, how do you naturally alternate something?
You don't. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with, and the name is escaping me, but I did post something about it on my Instagram story, that Bill Gates has this produce line. It starts with an A. Are you familiar, Felicia? Okay, because you're making this, I thought you knew about it, but he has a line of artificial food. Y'all, be careful what you're buying. Pay attention to these labels. Do your research. We're at this point, and I've talked about this last year about growing your own things and stocking up on what you need to, because the food is more fake than it has been before, and essentially it is out here controlling people. Here's the mind control. And here's the thing about mind control, because let's start talking about this music in the movie. This mind control essentially is all channeled through the things that we imbibe. If we paid attention, this is something that we see in today in the real world, and also in the movie. The things that they imbibed were food. It was in the chicken. It was in the music and the things we listened to. It was what we watched on TV, or whatever you're placing your eyes on. So if you're paying attention to all these ways that we ingest things, right, even in how we breathe, paying attention to that is the same thing that we experience actually in our natural life and spiritually, that the things that we take into our different gates, whether it is how we eat it, whether it's how we're hearing it, seeing it, touching it, or even spending a lot of time around it, it has the ability to have an influence on you. And that influence, as Aareyon brought up earlier, could either go one way or it could go the other way, right? And so when it comes to what we see in this movie, music was one thing that obviously was really very present. So we want to talk about that, because not only did we hear like different music from different times, but we noticed some things specifically about the music. So Felicia, I'm gonna let you jump in, because you brought up something that was really profound to me.
Well, I mean, right out the gate, when the movie starts, you hear distorted chanting almost. And it gives you that thriller movie vibe and gives you that, okay, something scary is going to happen. Something's wrong here. For me, and I love thriller movies, especially because they make you think more and make you kind of try to look past what's obvious, but sometimes the obvious thing is what you miss. And then literally in the opening scene, it zooms into these big blue white eyes that with this distorted music in the background, you're like, oh man. And me as a Black person, my first thought is, okay, here's the white man running our lives. What are you gonna do now? And then it zooms out and this man is just smiling and he's holding whatever can of whatever they're drinking. It wasn't the grape juice that we learned about later on, but it was whatever, the greater whatever juice it was. And you see this man and the distorted music then becomes somber. It becomes clear. And that right there alone is just, it literally sets the groundwork for what the movie is and what it will be. You don't think about it until you see it further on, but then we hear it again when Fontaine finally notices that, like, okay, something's not right here. Oh, this is me laying on this table. You hear it again in that moment, distorted music, and then reality becomes real, and then it's clear. That was the first thing I noticed.
No, that's really good. Even listening to you is a representation of what is getting ready to be perverted, being exposed. And I love the transition, and I kind of quickly mentioned that we have a lot of music from across our lifespans or different generations, which shows a level of mind control that has been accumulating for years. Like even when you look at the original Fontaine, he's much older than the clone Fontaine, and then behind in that scene when this older or the original Fontaine is presented, you see a line of what is supposed to be like evolution from going from a darker complexion person to a very fair complexion person, like that evolution that we were talking about that he was hoping to achieve. And so you've been working on this for years. You had to, if you had it in this many, like this operation in this level of a depth. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting was there were, and I don't even want to call them disguises, but the people that were there in plain sight that were not a part of the community, with these white guys with these afro wigs that they had on, plain sight, but yet people didn't question it. They didn't wonder why these people who did not look like them, who didn't represent them, who didn't live in their neighborhood, why is it that they were running so many different businesses in their communities that they went and patronized and supported continuously, why they were running these businesses and were trying to mimic elements of them. Where do we see this? We see this at our gas stations. We see this at our nail shops. We see this at the corner stores. We see this in so many places within our communities. And I am needing for us to kind of start asking questions of what's really going on here. Now, this is not to kind of like inflict any suspicions on these business owners, but instead to start wondering why isn't there as much representation of business owners within our own communities, and what are the barriers that contribute to that. But also, you need to stop supporting it. It boils down to that. You don't want it there, then stop spending your money there. Absolutely. And it takes that level of discipline to say no more. We're gonna have our representation in our communities, but it's that point of they had these disguises, yet they were right there in plain sight, and nobody asked any questions. Nobody said anything. No one batted an eye. And it wasn't until Slick Charles was eating the chicken, he's like, I've never seen Fontaine laugh. This is my first time seeing Fontaine laugh. And when it clicks for him that the powder is in the chicken, because he just experienced it before, right? Everybody laughing. He swipes off the chicken off the table, and then if y'all notice, everybody in the restaurant paused and looked at him. It caught people's attention that there's something about a disruption to the pattern that catches people's attention and gives the opportunity for it to stop. And that's when they should have spoke up then, but they didn't. And because they didn't, then they looked at the guy, the manager, whoever was working the counter, and was like, he's the one who sold us this chicken, and they say anything about all this stuff in the food, right? Silently complaining about problems in our communities, but not speaking up and saying something about it. If it's bothering you that much, then what are you doing about it?
It's funny you bring that up too, because if you remember when Yo-Yo was in the office and she was, digging around and she found the tape recorder, and the guy on the tape recorder saying, well, control group, whatever. Yeah. The more they ingest, the more side effects they have. And so that's indicative of that. They keep ingesting all this laughing powder or whatever was in the perm and, whatever the grape juice, the more you take it in, the more side effects they're going to have, and the more you're going to ignore the signs around you because you're so succumbed to the side effects of whatever the drugs are that you just don't pay attention to it.
Right.
And even going to, like you said, the girl with the perm, I think that this even goes back to the conversation we were having earlier with the view of women, because if you notice, she was having a conversation with the hairstylist. She was talking about some stuff going on, and I think a man was doing something, and she's like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and as she starts relaxing her hair, she's like, well, maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just, like, it's like that urge to almost like yo-yo to leave and to become who you really want to be. But then what they doing, they programming you, and now you staying in the cycle.
Not just programming, drugging you, right? This is being drugged, being intoxicated, being under the influence, right? Literally under the influence, right? And so when we talk about this part, who was also always under the influence, I think his name was Frog. The guy who was in front of the corner store with his cup all the time, and he always had these sayings, but there's this one scene when it was very clear that Frog wasn't as as off as people felt like. But this is what we do in our community. We label people who have been labeled as drunkards or drug addicts. We label them as quote unquote crazy, or they're not to be listened to, they're not important. But a lot of people who are also experiencing comorbidity with even mental health have experiences that are actually on par, and they really write about a lot of things, but end up using drugs to silence some of the things that they're experiencing and seeing because nobody is listening and rejecting them. I'll talk about the spiritual part some other day about that. But here we see Frog start to say things that even come off like a riddle, but they are clues and answers that help direct Fontaine, Yo-Yo, and Slick over to the next place that they need to go to figure all of this out. Because essentially, Frog is admitting to, I know a lot more than y'all think I know. But here's the thing, Fontaine contributed to the drunkening, is that a word, of Frog over and over, because every time he went there, and obviously he's a clone, so we can assume that everybody did this. Whenever they got something to drink, they gave in the wino, Frog, whoever, a little bit more to keep him drunk and keep him under the influence, so that nobody would continue, no one would listen to the answers that he had, because we just gonna write you off as a drunk. And so he sent them to this is when he sent them to the church, and I forget the language he used. He said something like, I'm looking at my notes, let's see if I wrote it down. He said something along the lines of like, where do people go when they're leaving Babylon? And then they sat down, they were like, oh, Mount Zion. Now, if you know the scripture, you know what that means, right? So then they go to Mount Zion Church, and my goodness, let me tell y'all about this scene.
Before you do that,
yeah,
I just want to talk about, because that right there, it agrees me as well. But talking about Frog, shameless plug, my uncle goes by the nickname Frog.
Shut up.
Yes.
Which uncle?
On my mom's side.
Oh, okay.
On my mom's side. So and it's crazy because like when me and you watched it, I didn't pick up on that. Like that was his name. But when I was watching it with my mom, I was like, Frog.
You have to pay close attention to hear it though.
You have to. Yes. And so I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. But then as well as like the first time, maybe it was the second time after Fontaine was cloned, and he came back and he's like doing his regular routine, and he comes out, pours him some, he's standing by his cart and he sees the person walking down the street, and they get swiped up by the van, and so he's like, what is that? And Frog says, want to see the wizard again?
Yes.
I'm like, nah, okay, you got to pay attention to what this man is saying.
Yes.
And the next time they go, and he's saying about the church scene, and he's giving them, I think that's when Fontaine's like recognizing like, hey, he actually speaking like real stuff. But I'll go into the
let me piggyback off of that one.
No,
let
go
me
ahead.
Let me go a little bit further back.
Ooh.
So the first scene of Fontaine coming out of the grocery store, or the corner store, bodega, if you will, wherever he's at, he grabs his 40 ounce, right? And he's got his lottery tickets, and that's his routine. We see him do that multiple times, right? He goes outside, scratches off, you lose, right? That's what he say. Then Frog, the first thing he said to him, because I wrote it down every time, the first thing he says to him is, it's in the water, young blood. That's the water that the white man on that it's connecting the dots for you. It's connecting the dots. That's the water that white man was holding. He said, it's
Wow.
in the water, Youngblood. And Fontaine's like, yeah, old man. All right, here's your boost to get you through the day, right? So then the second time he sees Frog, Frog is saying straighter is greater.
Mhm.
That's about the creamy crack, the perm, right? So then when they see Frog again, Frog says, he starts off in the beginning, he says, where does the train end? That was the first thing he said when Fontaine finally realized that Frog was putting out all this information and nobody's paying no attention to him. He said, where's the train end? And then he goes on to say, in the land of the blind. Where do people go? So they like, and Yo-Yo is over here like, oh yeah, this place and this. And he's like, I got it. And then he goes on to say, and he says, where do people go when they're trying to get out of Babylon? So last stop on the train, I said that already. And he says, on your head, by your head. And he keeps saying, near your head is everywhere. And they're not putting together the dots. But in my brain, I'm like, it is everywhere, in the water, in the food, literally on your head. Every sense is covered. Every, inch of your body is covered, and it's right underneath our noses, and we never pay attention to it. And where is it in the Black community? Where does that always lead to? The church. And we never pay attention to it. And that's the fact that they thought about it this hard and this deep is what was wild to me.
Yeah.
Wild. The church, nobody ever thinks that anything bad happens in the church, right?
Do you remember, Dr. Blaire, when we were watching this, what did I say as soon as they went and they was like went into the little lab under the church? I was like, all of this is under the church. And I was like, that's a lot to unpack. So we can go there now, but
yeah, let's go there. We're here now.
Under the church, like, woo.
I am so sorry I have to pause it here. I know the conversation is really good, but make sure you are staying tuned for the next part. Come back on Wednesday. Ooh, I have to let you know before you go. If you hadn't already grabbed your ticket for the Battlefield Conference, go ahead and do it. We're going to have conversations similar to this at the conference. And if you were there last year, then you already know a little bit of taste of what we're going to be doing, but we're going to step it up a notch. We have plans in place that are here to not only help our community, but also so that you have a quality experience. So we're expecting to see you there. And as I mentioned, make sure that you are reaching out to me, information there in the chat, or not the chat, the description box. If you have a desire to bring a group and you are interested in a group rate, information is down below in the description box. Hope to see you all there. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your community, and be sure to share with someone specific to learn more about the depth that's in this movie. And if you hadn't watched it, go ahead and watch it. They Clone Tyrone on Netflix. And of course, before you go, remember, if I'm great and you're great, then we're a great community.